I recently went on a few interviews to shift back into a career in media, which is what I've been doing for a long time and I love doing the most. And man, some of these companies have learned nothing during this labor shortage. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. It's true that people aren't nearly as motivated as they used to be in times past, and being on the hunt for a job has given me a few reminders as to why. See, I come from a generation where good, decent paying jobs were hard to find, and you were almost always in a position where you had to sell yourself as this epic, great candidate to employers for a job that you were likely settling for, that wasn't going to be great and you knew it, versus the other way around. I remember going on an interview to be a stock clerk for a supermarket chain in Manhattan and going into the interview room, and it was packed, cramped, with so many other people vying for the same minimum wage job. Now those jobs are so hard to fill that companies are bolstering hiring incentives, which is proving too little too late. Like any widespread social trend, an idea or concept that successfully infiltrates popular culture is almost impossible to undo. Social media platforms like YouTube and TikTok are drastically changing the labor dynamic, with creators openly and outwardly speaking on the pitfalls of taking a shitty job with an awful employer, and man, it is resonating. I think we've all at some point or another seen a video or post with a creator emphasizing on things that you've thought about or experienced at your workplace, past or present. Shitty bosses, crap pay, toxic work environments, benefits that don't feel beneficial at all still plague the work arena to this day, and we're just now seeing an overall rejection of these concepts as a whole. Now, I went out on a few interviews. Some of them were great, but others stood out to me in that they presented all the things that we don't want to put up with anymore, and for good reason, which I'm going to point out. The first was for a fairly big company that specializes in training videos for bigger companies like Amazon and McDonald's. They were looking for a senior editor, and so I applied and landed an interview. It was over a Zoom call with two people. It was the office manager and the regional manager. And man, they presented a bunch of stuff to me that all these creators warned against. They started out the interview by telling me that I was one of 4 candidates that they pulled from a pool of hundreds upon hundreds of other candidates. This unnecessary statement is a tactic that they use to generate urgency in you to take the job with few or no questions asked at whatever pay rate that they offer you. Also, they use it as a means to make you feel like you're indebted to them for having offered you the job in the first place. And many times they also use this as a reminder to current employees of how replaceable they are if they object to taking on extra work with no additional pay. Needless to say, we're off to a great start. Then they went over their company's history, who their clientele is, Social Security Administration, Black Swan Group, and how long they've been in business, how big they are, and presenting themselves as the opportunity of the lifetime, which is perfectly logical if you want to attract good talent. Now, it got interesting when they started asking me a bunch of questions about my work history and educational history. They went over my portfolio, they looked over my skill sets, and they seemed perfectly fine with what they saw. But the regional manager was really hung up on the fact that I don't have a bachelor's degree. Now, the office manager didn't seem bothered by this at all, but the regional manager almost seemed repulsed. And we ended up having this debate over the logic behind taking on crippling debt for a degree that I may never put to use. A degree that would likely put me behind the curve once I graduate and force me to have to take secondary workshops or master classes just so I can get up to par and be able to compete with the better talent in the industry. Interestingly, the office manager agreed with me wholeheartedly, explaining how she had to do exactly that just to be able to get a better job until she landed the role that she's in now. And man, that interaction fired me up. So I challenged the regional manager to give me a logical reason. Give me a logical reason why a person with a bachelor's degree is more attractive than a person that has a more robust and handsome portfolio and more relevant work experience. And he didn't like that at all. And his response was that in his mind, a person with a bachelor's degree wouldn't need to be trained as much as a person without. Now, in light of the fact that I'm the one being interviewed, I let it go. Because I didn't want to give him a reason to shut down. I don't want to keep rebutting and fighting back with him because he would shut down the whole interview, right? So we moved on. Then I started asking questions about longevity and my responsibilities. Longevity being, how do you get new clientele? How did you keep the company running? And then my responsibilities being, what is it exactly that I'll be responsible for doing? And their responses made me pump the brakes. They told me the company was in business for 30 years, which is great. I want to work somewhere that I know is stable. Then they told me that the department that I'd be working for is within its third of a 5-year contract for the Social Security Administration, and most of their clientele are contract-based. This was a red flag for me because a recruiter beforehand had told me that this would be a long-term permanent position. Contract work to me means short-term employment with long-term uncertainty on where you're going to be once your contract is up. And that's just not something I'm looking for at this point in my life. Now, the final nail in the coffin was when they told me I'll be doing a dual role as both a senior editor and an assistant to the office manager, covering her whenever she's on vacation or overloaded with work. That immediately shut everything down for me, because that to me means that I'm going to be doing my work and I'm going to be picking up her slack whenever she is not doing what she needs to be doing, or whenever she may genuinely be overworked, and whenever she's on vacation, but all this at no additional pay. So I said, no thanks. Now, what I got from this interview as a whole was, tell me why I should choose your neck to put my boot on. Show me some excitement for being spread thin at no extra pay. You didn't get a bachelor's degree? How dare you not complete your conformity training? How can I know for sure that you will succumb to being overworked? Now, another interview that stood out to me was in a media company at a neighboring state. Now, the potential commute for this one was already a huge negative, but I figured, why not? I'll interview and see if there's any possibility for remote work being a senior editor position. See, working in an office as an editor makes very little sense to me, especially if I have a rig that more than meets requirements for any kind of workload. He started the interview emphasizing location and the need for their ideal candidate to make that commute out there, which communicated two things to me. The first, that there's no chance of remote work, and the second being that the commute likely really freaking sucks. He continued with the standard synopsis of his company and its past and how they've done great things, except when I started asking more questions about longevity and how they generate clientele, the interview began to fall apart. I can't emphasize enough the importance of asking questions along the lines of the longevity and stability of your potential employer. I learned from an early age that just assuming that a company is always going to have work for you is a big mistake. Case in point is in a job that I had where I was an office manager to an alternative medicine practice where we would target well-to-do people that suffered from fibromyalgia. I was sold on the prospect of being a part of a big new thing in its infancy and the potential of growth. Unfortunately, the company only lasted about 1.5 years before they had to file bankruptcy, and not for reasons that you might think. It wasn't a scam operation or snake oil treatments, but sheer laziness. I had never worked for a team of lazier people in my life. It was a general practitioner, psychotherapist, psychiatrist, and a Chinese herbalist. And all of them had every reason in the world to not do any work on a given day. There was always a reason for having to clear my morning or clear my afternoon or clear the rest of my week because I have important meetings or I have to go somewhere or I have reasons I cannot work. And patients, rightly so, ultimately got fed up and stopped booking. And then I finally got the call from the owner telling me, hey man, things are rough. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to pay you this week. And that's when I bailed out with that important lesson in mind. No one's immune from the ebb and flow of the markets. And so it's important to ask these questions. How do you generate and maintain your revenue? How did you weather the storm of the pandemic? And asking these questions will only help you make an informed decision when choosing your next employer. Now, getting back to the interview at the other state, when I asked him this line of questioning, he ultimately revealed to me that the company was under new management and was back in the startup phase. Now, there's nothing wrong with joining a startup, so long as you know that startups can be risky business. If work or revenue streams dry up for whatever reason, you may be faced with layoffs, benefit cuts, and smaller, less consistent paychecks, which can be problematic if you're supporting a family and like the main breadwinner. Aside from all this, my biggest takeaway was his demeanor. Much like the first guy I interviewed with, he came off as smug while offering little assurances with job security and growth. And as I continued to press on him with uncomfortable questions like this, his demeanor changed from one of, hey, this is the opportunity of a lifetime, to take it or leave it, which is kind of a lame move. Like, don't call in candidates if you're just going on the assumption that they're desperate and they're going to take whatever it is that you throw at them. Because chances are overwhelming you're one of hundreds of jobs that they're applying to, especially if it's remote work. And please don't canvas for candidates if you can't even sell your own company as a decent place to work. Now, a couple of things that both of these interviews had in common was the use of problematic rhetoric, like, we're like family here and there's room for potential to grow, which really means that we're going to overwork you and have you do more tasks that are outside of your work scope at no additional pay. Another thing that both of them had in common was that both required a commute to do a job that I can effectively do from home, and none of them can give me a good reason as to why. This is the kind of stuff that people are hip to now, and it only works to repel good talent. If you're an employer looking for good help, you should probably ask these relevant questions and do your research in attracting good talent before you post up your jobs. Otherwise, you may find yourself being a perpetual placeholder for companies that do get it. I mean, look, people aren't nearly as motivated as they used to be to get to work. Now, is it because they're all lazy? Of course not. Are some of them lazy? Of course they are. But those that aren't, who make up the vast majority, are fed up with these antiquated business models that justify a middleman who is likely going to be the reason for them to abandon ship anyway. Now I'd like to hear from you. Tell me about your job experiences that stood out to you the most and what motivated you to take the job aside from the obvious. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and support my channel. And as always, thanks for watching. Peace.